orchestrated original memoir story with verified character names and emotional narrative structure. Orchestrated original memoir story with verified character names and emotional narrative structure. The day my husband handed me a 30-page prenup to sign, we had already been married for 11 years. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I had to. I sat with it at our kitchen table, the one we bought second-hand when we were broke newlyweds, the one I'd refinished myself over 3 weekends with sandpaper and a cheap palm sander I borrowed from a neighbor. And across from me sat the man I'd built a life with, sliding a stapled document toward me like it was a takeout menu. "It's just a formality," Brandon said. "My mum's accountant suggested it. Estate stuff, you know how she is." I did know how she was. That was the whole problem. But let me back up, because the prenup wasn't the beginning. It was somewhere near the middle, the moment the floor I'd been standing on finally cracked enough for me to see what was underneath. The beginning was much quieter than that, and much longer ago, and it didn't look like betrayal at all. It looked like love. It looked like family. It looked like exactly the kind of life I'd wanted since I was a little girl watching my own parents split up over money they didn't have. I met Brandon when I was 24, waiting tables at a steakhouse in Columbus to put myself through nursing school. He came in with a group of guys from his office, and he was the only one who looked me in the eye when he ordered. The only one who said thank you when I refilled the water glasses. Nobody else even noticed were empty. He left his number on the receipt with a little note. "If you ever want someone who tips before the meal even comes, call me." Cheesy. I called him anyway. He was kind back then. I need you to believe that, because otherwise none of the rest makes sense. I wasn't a stupid woman who married a monster with his fangs already out. I married a sweet, slightly insecure man who held my hand at his grandfather's funeral and cried at our wedding and stayed up all night with me when I failed my first board exam, telling me over and over that I was the smartest person he'd ever met. The cruelty came later, and it came slowly, and it came wearing his mother's face. Her name was Eileen, and from the very first dinner I understood that I was auditioning for a part I would never actually get. She had this house up in the hills outside the city, a big colonial with white columns and a circular driveway, the kind of house that announces money before anyone says a word. Old money, she liked to imply, though Brandon told me years later it was really his late father's insurance settlement and some lucky real estate. Eileen had a way of mentioning her wealth without ever mentioning it. "Oh, we'll just take my car, yours doesn't have the legroom. I had the caterer do the salmon. I assumed you don't really cook." Little knives wrapped in silk. The first thing she ever said to me when Brandon introduced us was, "A nurse. How practical." Then she turned to her son and said, "She's pretty though. You always did go for the pretty ones." I was 25 years old and I smiled and said thank you because I thought that was what you did. I thought if I was patient enough, kind enough, useful enough, she would eventually let me in. I want to reach back through the years and shake that girl. Patience was never going to be enough because the problem was never me. The problem was that Eileen had decided, long before I ever walked into her dining room, that no woman would ever be good enough to share the thing she loved most. And the thing she loved most wasn't her son, it was control. We got married in the spring, 2 years after we met. Eileen paid for the wedding, and she never let me forget it. She chose the venue, overruled my flowers, told me my dress made me look broad in the shoulders, and steered me toward one she preferred. I let her. God help me, I let her, because Brandon would put his arm around me afterward and whisper, "Thank you for being so good to her. I know it's hard. It means everything to me." And I was so in love that his gratitude felt like enough payment for swallowing my own opinions whole. For the first few years, we lived in a little rental apartment while Brandon worked his way up at his company and I picked up extra shifts at the hospital. We were genuinely happy. I remember those years the way you remember a warm room you used to sit in. We ate ramen on Tuesdays and splurged on real pasta on Fridays. We had a whiteboard on the fridge where we tracked our savings, every dollar we put toward a down payment on a house of our own. I drew little stars on it when we hit our milestones: 5,000, 10,000. When we crossed 20,000, Brandon picked me up and spun me around the kitchen, and we ordered the expensive pasta even though it was a Tuesday. That money mattered to me. I want to be clear about that because of what came later. That $23,000 was 1,100 shifts on my feet, holding the hands of people on the worst days of their lives, cleaning up things you don't want me to describe, charting until my eyes burned. It was overtime on Christmas. It was missing my own grandmother's last birthday because I traded the shift for the holiday pay. That money was my body, converted into a future. And I trusted it to the man I loved. When I was 30, we found the house. Not Eileen's house, not anything close to it. A modest 3-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood with a maple tree in the front yard that turned the color of fire every October. The mortgage stretched us, but with our savings for the down payment and both our incomes, we could swing it. I cried in the empty living room the day we got the keys. I sat right down on the bare floor and cried, because I had never in my life had a thing that was truly mine. That was the house I refinished the kitchen table for. That was the house where, 11 years into our marriage, my husband handed me a prenuptial agreement. But between those two moments, something happened that I didn't see coming, even though every sign was there. Eileen got sick. It started small. She forgot things, repeated herself, called Brandon by his father's name once and then laughed it off. Then she fell on her own staircase and broke her hip, and the doctors found that the falling and the forgetting were connected to something bigger, something with a long clinical name that meant, in plain English, that she was going to need a lot of help, and she was going to need it for a long time. I'm a nurse. I want you to remember that. When the family gathered in that big colonial dining room to talk about what to do, I was the only person in the room who actually knew what caring for someone like Eileen would require. I knew about the medications and the fall risks and the way the personality changes before the body does. I knew because I'd done it for strangers, hundreds of times on 12-hour shifts. And so when the conversation turned, as I knew it would, to who was going to take care of her, every head in that room turned toward me. Brandon's sister Megan lived 3 states away and had what she called a very demanding career in marketing, which mostly seemed to mean she posted about wellness on the internet. She dabbed at her dry eyes and said she just couldn't. She had the kids, she had her work, she just wasn't built for the medical stuff the way I was. Brandon squeezed my hand under the table. "You're so good at this," he said. "Mom trusts you. And honestly, it would save us so much money. Those care facilities are $6,000–7,000 a month, some of them more." There it was, the number, always the number. I should have said no. I have replayed that dining room 1,000 times in my head, and in every version, the smart version of me stands up and says, "I love this family, but I have a job and I have a husband. And I cannot become an unpaid full-time caregiver for a woman who has spent 11 years making it clear she doesn't like me." That woman would have saved herself so much. But I'm not that woman, or I wasn't back then. I was the woman who still thought love was a thing you earned through sacrifice. So I said yes. I said, of course, she's family. And here is the part that still makes my chest tight when I think about it. There was a plan, and I agreed to it, and the plan was the trap. The plan was this: I would cut back to part-time at the hospital to care for Eileen. We would move her into our house, into the spare bedroom, so I could be close. Brandon's income could cover the gap from my lost hours, because Eileen, in gratitude, would help with the mortgage. And eventually, Brandon told me, his eyes shining, the colonial house would be sold and the money would come to us, to the people who stepped up, and we'd be set for life. Megan had already agreed she didn't need a cut, he said, since she couldn't help with the care. It sounded fair. It sounded like a family taking care of its own. I signed nothing because back then I still believed that family didn't need contracts. That was my first mistake, not the only one, but the first. For 2.5 years, I was Eileen's nurse, her cook, her companion, her target, I bathed a woman who, on her good days, told me I was doing it wrong, and on her bad days, didn't know who I was at all. I crushed her pills into applesauce. I changed sheets at 3 in the morning. I sat with her through panic attacks where she screamed for her dead husband, and I held her hand and lied and told her he was just at the store. I lost weight. I stopped sleeping. My friends stopped calling because I always said no, and eventually they stopped asking. And the money. Gods, the money. The mortgage help that Eileen was supposed to provide came for the first 3 months and then simply stopped. When I gently mentioned it to Brandon, he got irritated. She's confused, you know that. I'll handle it. He didn't handle it. We dipped into our savings. The whiteboard on the fridge. The one I used to draw stars on. I took it down because I couldn't stand to look at the number going the wrong way. My hours at the hospital weren't part-time anymore. They were almost nothing because Eileen couldn't be left alone and we couldn't afford the relief aids I kept asking for. My nursing license, the thing I'd bled for, was gathering dust. My income, the income that had been half the foundation of everything we built, was effectively gone, and I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was love. The thing about a slow betrayal is that you don't notice the water rising until it's at your throat. By the time I started to feel afraid, I had no idea how deep I already was. The first real crack came on a Tuesday. I remember it was a Tuesday because I'd just gotten Eileen down for her afternoon nap, the only 40 minutes in the day that were mine, and I'd sat down at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and Brandon's laptop, because mine had died and I needed to check our bank account. I wasn't snooping. I want that on the record. I was a wife checking a joint account on a shared computer. And the account was almost empty. Not low, empty. The savings we'd spent 13 years building, the savings that had been at over $40,000 before the caregiving started, was down to $4,000 and change. And there was a transfer I didn't recognize. $30,000, moved out 3 weeks earlier to an account I'd never seen. My hands went cold. I'm a nurse. I know what shock feels like in the body, the way the blood pulls in toward the core. I felt it then. I scrolled, and I found more transfers, smaller ones, going back over a year, to the same account. The memo on one of them said, in Brandon's handwriting square block letters even in typing, Mom's house Megan. Megan. The sister-in-law who couldn't help. The sister-in-law who supposedly didn't need a cut. I don't remember deciding to keep looking. I just remember the next hour, the way you remember a car accident in fragments. I found emails. Brandon's email was logged in, and I am not proud of reading it, but I will never, ever apologize for it either, because what I found in there was the truth I had been kept from for years. Eileen's colonial house had already been sold, 8 months earlier. It sold for $640,000. And the money, every dollar of it, had gone into a trust. A trust that named Brandon and Megan as beneficiaries, not me. There was no version of any document anywhere in which I existed. The woman who had given up her career and her health and her savings to care for Eileen so that the family wouldn't have to pay for a facility, I was nowhere. I had been the unpaid staff, the cost-saving measure, the salmon Eileen assumed I couldn't cook. There was an email from Megan to Brandon. I read it 4 times. She wrote that she was so glad your wife was handling Mum because it was basically free care, and that once Mum passed, they should make sure to keep the estate clean, meaning, I understood with perfect clarity, keep it away from me. Brandon had written back a single line, don't worry. Mom's lawyer is drafting something to protect us. Trust me. Something to protect us. The prenup. Oh my God. The prenup he handed me 11 years into our marriage wasn't about his mother's accountant at all. It was about making sure that when the trust money eventually flowed to him, I could never touch it. It was a wall built quietly around money that should have been partly mine by every measure of fairness and law and love. They had used me to save hundreds of thousands of dollars in care costs, harvested an inheritance off the back of my unpaid labor, and were now lawyering up to make sure I never saw a cent. I closed the laptop. I went upstairs. I checked on Eileen, who was sleeping with her mouth open, looking so small and harmless, and I felt something I had never felt for a patient in my life, which was nothing. A flat, cold nothing. I had given this family my body and my future, and they had been laughing about it in writing. I did not scream. I did not cry. Not yet. I am a nurse, and in a crisis, nurses get very, very calm. I went back downstairs and I started taking notes. This is the part I want every woman watching to hear, so let me slow down. When you discover a betrayal this big, every instinct in your body screams to confront it immediately, to throw the proof in their faces and watch them squirm. Do not do that. The squirming is not worth what it costs you, because the moment they know, they start protecting themselves, and they have a head start on you measured in years. I gave myself nothing away. That night, when Brandon came home, I made dinner. I asked about his day. I let him hand me that prenup at the kitchen table and slide it toward me, and I looked at it, and I looked at the man I had loved for 13 years, and I said the most important sentence of my entire life. I said, let me have my own lawyer look it over, just to be safe. He blinked. He had not expected that. For a second I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Calculation, maybe a little fear, and then he smiled and said, of course, whatever makes you comfortable. The next morning, I called a divorce attorney. Not because I had decided to divorce him, not yet, but because I needed to understand exactly where I stood, and you do not ask the person who set the trap to explain the trap to you. His name was Mr. Castellano, and he had grey hair and reading glasses. He kept pushing up his nose, and when I laid out everything I'd found, the sold house, the trust, the transfers, the unpaid 2.5 years of skilled nursing care, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he took off his glasses and said, let me make sure I understand. You provided full-time professional caregiving with a nursing license for over 2 years with the understanding that you would share in the estate. And there's a paper trail of them discussing how to exclude you from that estate. Yes, I said. Don't sign that prenup, he said. Don't sign anything, and before you do anything else, I want you to do one thing for me. What? Start keeping a log. Every hour you spend caring for her, starting today. Every medication, every task, every dollar of your money that goes toward her care or the household. Dated. Be specific. You weren't a wife doing a favor. You were unpaid skilled labor, and in this state that's not nothing. I did. For the next 2 months, while Brandon thought I was thinking about the prenup, I documented everything. I went back through bank records and reconstructed 2.5 years of evidence. I found the original emails, the texts, the transfers, and I made copies of all of it and put them somewhere Brandon would never look. I got written estimates from 3 different home care agencies showing what professional care for someone with Eileen's needs would have cost, between $8,000 and $11,000 a month. Mr. Castellano did the math out loud in his office one afternoon, and I watched his eyebrows go up. Conservatively, he said, the market value of the care you provided, unpaid, is north of $240,000. $240,000. That was what my body had been worth in the currency they cared about, and they had pocketed it and tried to wall me out with a 30-page document. But here's the part that surprised even Mr. Castellano. While I was documenting everything, something shifted inside Eileen. The disease moves in strange ways. There were windows, sometimes, when the fog lifted and the woman she used to be came back for an hour or two. And in one of those windows, on an ordinary afternoon while I was feeding her soup, she looked at me with completely clear eyes and said my name. My real name. Not the nurse. Not Brandon's wife. You've been so good to me, she said, better than my own children. I almost dropped the spoon. They don't come, she said. Megan doesn't come. Brandon, he comes, but he's always on his phone, always talking about the money. You're the one who's here. You're the one who holds my hand at night. I didn't know what to say. After everything, after years of her little knives wrapped in silk, I just held her hand. I changed it, she said. Changed what, Eileen? My will, the trust. I had my lawyer come, the young one, not the one Brandon uses. I changed it. She looked at me with that terrible, brief clarity. I'm not stupid. I know what they're doing. I know what they're doing. I know what they did with the house. I left them their share. But I left a piece to you, for the care, because you earned it, and they didn't. And then the fog rolled back in, and she asked me if her husband was at the store, and I told her yes, he'd be home soon, and I lied to her gently the way I had 1,000 times. But my heart was pounding, because I understood that in one of her clear hours, the woman who had never liked me had done the one thing none of them expected. She had seen the truth. Eileen passed away that autumn. The maple in our front yard had just turned the color of fire. I was with her when she went, the way I'd been with so many strangers, holding her hand, and I cried, really cried, because grief is complicated and a person can break your heart and still deserve your tears. Brandon and Megan moved fast after the funeral, almost indecently fast. There was a reading of the trust documents and they sat there smug, Megan in an expensive black dress, Brandon's hand resting on the table near the lawyer's papers like he was already counting. And then the lawyer, the young one, Eileen's own choice, the one Brandon didn't control, began to read. I will remember Brandon's face for the rest of my life. The moment the lawyer read the amended provision, the one leaving a specified portion of the trust directly to me, in recognition of years of dedicated personal care, Brandon's mouth actually fell open. Megan made a sound like she'd been slapped. That's not. She couldn't have. She wasn't competent, Megan sputtered. The amendment was witnessed and notarized, the lawyer said calmly, with a contemporaneous physician's note attesting to her capacity on the date of signing. It will hold. It held. Brandon turned to me in that office, in front of everyone, and the mask came all the way off for the first time in 13 years. You did this, he hissed. You manipulated a sick old woman. And I looked at the man I had loved, the man who'd left me his number on a receipt, who'd cried at our wedding, who'd spun me around the kitchen, and who had then used me up like a resource and tried to wall me out with a contract, and I said the second most important sentence of my life. I said, no, Brandon, she manipulated me for 13 years. The difference is, in the end, even she had the decency to make it right. You never planned to. I filed for divorce the next week. Mr. Castellano had everything ready, the care log, the bank records, the emails where they'd schemed to exclude me, the documented value of 2.5 years of unpaid skilled nursing care. Brandon's lawyer took one look at the file and advised him to settle, quietly and quickly, because the alternative was a courtroom where every email would be read aloud. I kept the house with the maple tree. I kept the inheritance Eileen left me, and I walked away from a marriage with my dignity, my savings restored, and something I hadn't had in years, my own life back. I went back to nursing full-time. My license was still good. The first day I walked back onto the floor in my scrubs, an old co-worker hugged me so hard I nearly cried and said, "We missed you." 3 little words. They meant more than 13 years of thank you for being good to her. I want to tell you that I'm fine now, and mostly I am, but I won't pretend the betrayal didn't leave marks. I trust differently now. I read contracts. I keep my own accounts. When a man tells me something is just a formality, I hear an alarm in the back of my head that will probably never fully shut off. That's the real cost of being used by the people who are supposed to love you. It's not just the money, it's that you have to relearn how to believe anyone. But here's what I'd say to the woman who's where I was, the one quietly drowning while telling herself it's love. Sacrifice is not the same as being sacrificed. There is a difference between giving freely to people who cherish you and being slowly consumed by people who have decided your purpose is to make their lives cheaper and easier. Love that requires you to disappear isn't love. It's just a very long con with good lighting. I think about Eileen sometimes. The woman who spent over a decade letting me know I wasn't good enough, who in her final clear hours saw more truly than anyone else in that family ever did. I don't think she liked me, even at the end. But she respected me. She saw what I'd done, and she called it what it was, earned. There's a strange peace in that. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of even ground. The maple turned to fire again this October, the third time since the divorce. I sat on my own front porch, in my own house, with my own coffee, in the quiet I'd fought so hard to win back, and I watched the leaves come down. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I wasn't waiting for anything. I wasn't auditioning for a part I'd never get. I wasn't earning a love that was never coming. I was just home,